Awesome, thank you. All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to begin here in a moment. If you could silence your cell phones and make sure that your microphones are turned on. And just a friendly reminder, if you haven't signed in and you are a guest on the sign-in sheet, please do so before you leave today. Oh man, I'm way behind. It is one of them days. All right, today is a regular legislative meeting for Barberton City Council. It is Monday, November 27th. 6:04 p.m. Before we go into our regular legislative meeting, we do have individual committee meetings for this evening. And first up will be City Properties, Parks, and Recreation with Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. City Properties and Park Recreation meeting November 27, 2023, Council Chambers at 6:04. Members including myself as chair, Mr. Heidick, Mrs. Fry. Other council members are included. Mrs. Coburn and Mrs. Thompson are absent. Guests noted. We have no new request for legislation. We do have pending legislation. Enter a contract with various city properties. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to entertain the contract to sell various city properties. Any questions or concerns on that one?
No.
Seeing none. Council members? Seeing none. All right. Open this up for no science discussion. Awesome.
Nothing.
Quick and easy. Motion to adjourn, please.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
And we are adjourned at 6:05. With that, I pass, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jaber. Next up is Public Welfare and Safety with Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. The time is 6:05 p.m. and we are in council chambers. The date is November 27th, 2023. It is a Monday. All members of my committee are here with the exception of Mrs. Coburn. So that would be me as the chairman and Shorter Griffin as a member of the committee. All council members are here with the exception of Mrs. Thompson. She's absent tonight. And guests as noted on my agenda sheet. We had no request for legislation, and we have no pending legislation. So I'll open it up if anyone has anything to comment on in regard to public welfare and safety. Hearing nothing, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, motion made by Mr. Griffin, and I will second that. And we are adjourned at 6:06 p.m.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry. Next up, Rules, Marketing, Development with Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rules Marketing Development. I would like to call this meeting to order tonight, November 27th. We're in council chambers. All members are present except Mrs. Taylor Thompson. She's absent tonight. We don't have any new legislation tonight. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion for anybody from the gallery or from the body? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick. We're adjourned at 6:07. With that, I pass.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Next up, City Utilities with Mrs. Coburn. She's absent. Co-chair, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. The time is 6:07. It is Monday, November 27th, 2023. We are in council chambers, and I am bringing the City Utilities Committee to order. Tonight, Mrs. Coburn is absent. and we only have 2 members on the committee tonight. That would be myself and Erica Bailey. All other council members are present with the exception of Mrs. Thompson, and other guests as noted on the agenda sheet. There are no requests for legislation, and there is no pending legislation. Does anyone have any miscellaneous discussion in regard to utilities? Any questions, comments? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Motion made by Mrs. Bailey, and I will second that, and we are adjourned at 6:08 PM.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry. Last but not least, Finance and Personnel, Mr. Heide.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I say anything here, Director Miller, there's 2 of 2 absent. That doesn't meet a quorum, does it? Since it's not a majority? Thank you. Finance Personnel does not have a quorum tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Heide. That concludes our individual committee meetings for this evening. Since it only took us a couple minutes to go through the committee meetings, is there any objection to just going through into the Mrs. Miller?
Does that prevent you from bringing legislation out of committee then for the following week?
There was 0 on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you would have to call for a special meeting before the legislative meeting.
Thank you.
It would fall into place. Next week would be our next meeting would be the committee of the whole.
Anyway.
All right, no objections to moving forward with a regular legislative meeting? All right. Let me get situated here. I got things everywhere. So are you good to go? All right. Today is a regular legislative meeting of Barberton City Council. It's Monday, November 27th. I call this meeting to order at 6:10 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by invocation by our one and only Mrs. Lori Freese Pratt. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Gracious Father and God, thank you for the freedoms that we have to meet and to govern our city. Bless this council and their decisions. Help them to always keep their constituents in mind. Thank you again for this council and their ability to work as a team for the benefit of Barberton. Bless our first responders, our police and our fire and our EMTs, our hospital staff, our teachers, and our military. Thank you, Lord, for everything you have given us in blessings. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Lord. Clerk, please call the roll.
President Greer.
Present.
Mr. Heide.
Here.
Mrs. Thompson is absent. Mrs. Bailey.
Here.
Mrs. Angela.
Here.
Mr. Griffin.
Here.
Mr. Jaber.
Here.
Mrs. Coburn is absent. Mrs. Fry.
Here.
Approval of the minutes. Approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, November 13th, 2023. Mr. Heide?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting from Monday, November 13th, 2023.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mr. Heidick's motion for the approval of the minutes.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Fry to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, November 13th, 2023, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Approval of the minutes of the special meeting held on Tuesday, November 21st, 2023. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the acceptance of the finance report for the month of October 2023.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry?
He said the finance report.
Oh,
What was it?
No, I'm
Minutes or
sorry.
the finance report?
This is a special meeting. Minutes of the
We
special
don't
meeting.
have it on here.
No.
That's
It's not on here,
It's not
but
on here.
It's not
But
on
you
the
had said
agenda.
the special meeting.
On that one, you're right.
If it's,
Don't do
is it
it.
on our public?
Don't do it, we'll do it next time.
Okay. We will forego that one until our next legislative meeting. For the finance report, it's all right. Thank you. Acceptance of the finance report for the month of October 2023 as presented. Mr. Haddock.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to accept the finance report for the month of October 2023.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mr. Heidick's motion to approve the finance report.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Haddock and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to accept the finance report for the month of October 2023 as presented. Are there any remarks?
Mrs. Fry,
Mrs. Fry? I'm sorry, did I say?
Mrs. Coburn.
Oh. You guys are changing. All right. So it was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Fry to accept the finance report for the month of October 2023 as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Finance report is adopted. Petitions and claims.
We have none.
Matters requested.
They've all been dispersed.
Citizens addressing council. Did not take a moment to check. Is it? If you could step up, yeah, grab that paper for me, please. You can bring it up. I can grab it from you afterwards. Just state your name, address, and reason for speaking. It is a legislative night, so you can only speak on legislative matters on the agenda.
Okay, that's fine. My name is Melissa Naglick. I live at 74 27th Street Northwest. I've lived in Barberton for several years. I graduated from Barberton High School, and I have kids who go to Barberton schools. I'm here to speak against the issuance of the C1 or C2 license, or really any convenience store or carryout permit for the address located at 522 4th Street. As you might recall, this used to be a Circle K convenience store for many years. I remember purposely avoiding that location because of the atmosphere, the people loitering, the soliciting, the crime, the kids smoking on the side of the building. Just wasn't a location that I felt safe at, not by myself or with my children. So when I heard someone was interested in reopening it, I thought that it was a bad idea. Being that place has been a magnet for trouble over the years. I did pull the call logs, the police call logs, and in the 7 years that it was operational, there were over 1,100 calls. I do have a copy of those if you guys want them. I could provide those to you. Things like domestic violence, overdoses, a significant amount of theft, stealing, just a variety of calls that the officers were dispatched to time and time again. So I just ask that you kind of keep in mind the type of location that was when it was operational as you come across this legislation tonight, and thinking if that's really the best move for the schools that are nearby, for the newly built skate park, or just for the students that are in that area consistently day in and day out. That's it.
All right, thank you. If you want to leave that sheet up there, we'll grab it.
The sign-in?
The,
Call out?
I'm sorry, the public forum.
200 sheets.
No,
Okay.
the form to speak publicly.
Okay, it's right up here.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, are there any other citizens addressing council? All right. First reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 154-2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Authorized Payment, Retzel Consulting Solutions. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Finance to pay an invoice to Retzel Consulting Solutions for services provided for economic development in the amount of $3,333.33 and declaring an emergency.
All right, before I go ahead and motion to suspend this, the Finance Committee does not have a quorum today, and me being as president, Director Miller, could you provide legal clarification? Am I able to second a motion as president?
You're a ex officio member of every committee, so yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. All right, motion to suspend, Mr. Heddick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And myself, I'll second Mr. Heidick's motion for the suspension. Motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by myself to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Mrs. Fry?
I feel like Joyce tonight. I believe Lori said 2022, 154, 2022, rather than 23.
2023, I don't know.
So I don't know if that's a big deal,
It says
but,
2023.
yeah, it does,
Oh,
but I
oh.
thought she
Oh, when
said
she read it.
2022.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Like I said, I feel like Joyce today.
Well, we already made a motion. The motion is for ordinance number 154, 2023. Thank you. There's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I can hear tonight.
You guys are so upset with the Browns game, that's why.
man, I'll tell you.
We're here for you.
Easy.
Are there any other remarks for suspension? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn is absent. Mrs. Thompson is absent. Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
All right, and my vote is not needed. Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adopt ordinance 154, 2023.
Thank you. And I would like to second Mr. Heidick's motion for adoption. Motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by myself to adopt ordinance 154-2023. Are there any remarks?
Option, both of them.
Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn is absent. Mrs. Thompson is absent.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 155-2023, presented by Mr. Jaber. Title, enter into contract various city properties. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into contract to sell various city properties.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.0 of Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Jaber's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Jaber and seconded by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Abstain.
Mrs. Thompson is absent. Mrs. Coburn is absent.
All right. Motion to suspend carries. Motion to adopt, Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for adoption of ordinance number 155-2023.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Jaber and seconded by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance, I flipped it over. Number 155-2023. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn is absent. Mr. Griffin.
Abstain.
Mrs. Thompson is absent. Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 156-2023, presented by Mrs. Angela. Title, enter into contract, Vetchco Excavating. An ordinance authorizing the city of Barberton to enter into contract with Vetchco Excavating in the amount of $4,841,390.92 for the reconstruction of South Van Buren and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. Bailey?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Angeloff's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and seconded by Mrs. Bailey to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson. is absent. Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn is absent. Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 156-2023.
Thank you, and Mrs. Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Angeloff's motion on adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and seconded by Mrs. Bailey to adopt ordinance number 156-2023. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn is absent. Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson is absent. Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
This ends the first reading.
Second reading of ordinances and resolutions.
There are none.
Third reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 141, 2023, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, zoning map amendment, former Oakdale site. An ordinance denying the rezoning of the former Oakdale site, parcel number 01-17406, 01-17407, 01-17408, 01-17409, 01-17410, 01-17411, 01-17412, 01-17413, 01-17414, 01-17415, 01-17416, 01-17417, 01-17418, 01-17419, 01-17420, and 01-17421 to RM18 residential multifamily. This is the third reading. The first reading was on October 23rd, 2023. The second reading was on November 13th, 2023.
Thank you. Before I call for a motion of this, just for clarification so there's no confusion, a vote yes for this is supporting the denial or the recommendation to deny the rezoning. And is there a motion to adopt? Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance 141-2023.
Thank you. And next up would be Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Mrs. Angeloff's adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and second by Mr. Jaber to adopt ordinance number 141-2023. Are there any remarks? All right. For the record, Councilwoman Thompson has reached out and asked me to read a statement since she can't be here tonight. And this will be, quote, regarding the rezoning of the Oakdale site to the residential multifamily, I fully support the Planning Commission's recommendation to deny this request. I've had several residents reach out to me by phone and email regarding this matter. Many nearby residents also attend both Planning Commission meetings and council meetings to voice their concerns. The plans for multifamily units is not conducive to the neighborhood, and they also do not meet the requirements outlined in our city's development code. I urge my fellow council representatives to vote yes this evening, denying the request for rezoning. Once again, is there any other remarks? All right, clerk, please call the roll for adoption.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn is absent. Mrs. Thompson is absent. Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
This ends the third reading.
Motion for adoption carries. Thank you. Appointments.
To the city's Design Review Board, Mrs. Joyce Barron, to begin January 1st, 2024 for a 3-year term ending December 31st, 2026.
Thank you. Is there a motion to appoint Mrs. Barron? We'll go with Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion to appoint Joyce Barron to the Barberton Design Review Board for a 3-year term starting January 1st, 2024, ending December 31st, 2026.
Thank you. And Mr. Jaber, you second?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Angeloff's motion.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and seconded by Mr. Jaber to appoint Mrs. Joyce Barron to the City of Barberton's Design Review Board. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. The motion carries. Miscellaneous and unfinished business.
We have a liquor license request, which is new to the Enchanted Square LLC. C1, C2 is the type of license, doing business as Enchanted Square. The address is 5224 4th Street, Northwest in Barberton. There were no objections from the safety director, there were no objections from the police department, and we received an objection from the ward council person.
All right, so there was also no objections from any of the administration. We did receive an objection from one council person. Now, this is a little different. Were you coming up to speak?
I can if you want me to explain.
No, that's fine. I got it. Thank you. As you recall, this is the second time seeing that the Enchanted Square LLC has applied for the liquor license. This had to come back around for the first time in decades. The legislative body, someone from the legislative body had concerns about a liquor license. Being that only one person objected, it was sent to Columbus, where some of the boxes weren't checked, because when one council person objects, it must be a legislative body's decision as the body to object together. So this will be a rule change in the new council, hopefully, to outline this process to make sure that this is not looked over again. So from now on, when there is, if there is no objections, and if there is, or it doesn't matter, if there's objections or there is no objections for a liquor license, we will then ask for objections from council members. At that time, if there is a council member that objects to the liquor license, you'll be given the floor to state your case, and after which time, then we'll take a formal, quick vote, yay or nay, for council. I don't want to get too far ahead of this since we read it, but
Are we
Mrs.
able to then
Baird?
ask questions to the person who's
correct,
objecting?
you can.
Okay,
Yeah, it'll be an open dialogue.
okay.
Yep.
We have specific time restraints to get those back.
Objections?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did extend the hearings for this, in this case, given the circumstances. So, is there any objections from any council members? Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am objecting. On July 11th, I did get an email from Ms. Price asking if I had any objections on this matter. I told her, not that I know of, but I'll ask around. I did have Mr. Heidick's input and told me, talk to the neighborhood, see what they say, talk to the residents, constituents. I did talk to constituents. I walked the neighborhood. Mr. Heidick gave me an idea for a sign. I had 77 residents, constituents in my ward say they were not approving this. They did not want it because of being necessarily across the street from the school. I also had the school board, 2 members from the school board reach out to me, and the school did turn it down also. So the school board will be going into liquor control to tone their concerns. Again, I was going to abstain from voting tonight because I do have a family business across the street. And I did reach out to Suzanne, who the owner is. And I've known Suzanne for about 20 years, and we talk twice a week. And I was like, hey, Suzanne, what's going on? She's like, we don't have no plans yet. We're going to see what we might do, might not do. I was like, okay, well, I'm having constituents concerned about this, and they don't want it. And that was the last time I talked to her. It's been almost 4 or 5 months. This did create a situation between me and her, even though it shouldn't, because I told her it's not me. I was like, there was a stroke K there for 30 years. I know there were problems there all the time. So the school board said no, September 13th. Mr. Heidick will read that off if you don't mind.
The motion was made by Mr. Paulsek, seconded by Mrs. Eberhardt, to take action on the institution notice for liquor permit for Enchanted Square LLC. Discussion among board members regarding the permit is for the restaurant or the storefront. All board members were in agreement to object to the request, a hearing on the advisability of issuing a permit, and to hold a hearing to the county seat of premise. It was 5-0. The school board voted in favor of objection.
So that was
That is from their official minutes there.
And let me see what else. I think that's it. I mean, and I talked to Miss Emily Beck when she did win the council. I'm like, listen, Emily, here's a folder I'm gonna give you. It's gonna have the concerns and situations I have in my ward. I told her one of them on this right now is the liquor license, and also the other ones going on in the neighborhood. You know, calls me all the time, emails me all the time. And I mean, I don't want to put in the middle between me and Suzanne and this, especially I'm right across the street from her. And after hearing say there was over 1,100 calls in that address, I'd like to see a copy of that too, please, if you don't mind. And if anybody has any questions, I can see your guys' hands going up.
Yeah.
Raise them up. Go ahead.
First, do you have a liquor license at your?
Yes.
Okay. So from my perspective, if I remember being in high school, at Barberton High School, a liquor license should only be providing liquor to adults 21 and over.
Correct.
In general. I don't know, it's hard for me to say no to a business wanting a liquor license if the police aren't saying that there's an issue with it, if the public safety director, and truthfully, have you had issues with having a liquor license and calls and?
Knock on wood, in 25 years since we've been there next door and combined that one, we've had no violations for liquor or cigarette underage. The Circle K across the street did have
Right.
7 violations for underage.
But this business is not going to be
Correct.
owned. This is a completely
Right.
different
Myself, I have
business.
not. To answer your question, I have not had any
Right.
violations, no.
Does it, and this is just open conversation, are you wanting to deny it because you have a liquor license, or is it solely because of safety issues as a business?
Not safety or good of liquor,
Yeah.
it's constituents.
Okay.
We did sign the paper, and it
Okay.
said there was 77 of them. Now, here's the thing, we don't deny or say yes or no. We just say, should this go into liquor? Like
Right.
the school, liquor board.
Yeah.
So the school board, they say yes or no.
Yeah.
And if they say yes, let the liquor control handle it. Right now, Mr. Griffin has one in his ward right now,
Yeah.
and it's going through liquor control. They had a meeting 2 weeks ago, so the city did deny it, not deny it, but opposed it. So now it has to go through liquor control. We don't say yes or no.
Right.
We just say we are opposing it. This way liquor control can hear both stories.
Well, and I understand you've been there for a very long time, but
Yes.
it's just odd to me, and again, I wasn't around when it happened, why they would approve you for, you're very close to the high school, and so are they.
Because we transfer a license.
You transferred, okay,
Yes. Now, when
okay.
new licenses happen, you have to apply for liquor control.
Oh, okay, okay,
And 9 out of 10 times if there's schools or churches or parks, they're going to say, bring it to hearing.
okay,
So then the hearing hears it, and then they decide. We don't decide, we say yes or no. We
Okay.
just say, is there any concerns from the schools,
okay,
the churches, constituents? So in my situation, only concerns I have is the constituents.
okay.
Now also hearing that the school objected, so now we have concern also from the schools.
Mhm.
So liquor control will say yes or no. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
It does.
Yes.
So the only thing that we can bank on is Circle K that owned it prior had 1,100 calls and had this and that. This is a new company that's taking it over. I don't know what the plans look. I think at one time you said they might put a drive-through or something of that through.
I never said drive.
And I just feel it's not fair because all we have is what was there before. We don't know how this is going to be operated. They might be tight. watching everything and whatnot. It is right across the street from the school. I know that you transferred yours. I don't like that across the street from the school either. And Speedway's going down on Barber Road.
Sheets.
Sheets, okay,
And
is that beer, and do they have a beer
Oh,
and
yes,
wine or
definitely.
something? So, you know, so I just, personally, I just think it's unfair that we can go back and say, this is what happened with the other owner that could have had it for how many years, therefore, we're gonna deny them a license, or, you know, we're gonna oppose their license. We don't know how they're gonna be, you know? And is that the restaurants next door, is that in combination? Are they planning on
That's what we don't know.
putting it together? You know, I don't know if maybe the restaurant's booming and they want to add on, they want that liquor license, you know?
He'll let you know what the liquor license is, the rules, Mr. Bennett.
Were you finished? I'll wait.
Well, I don't like any of it in front. I don't like down on Barber Road, you know, they're gonna have beer and whatnot, and Mr. Jaber's place has that. And how do we know how Enchanted Square, how do we know how tight they're going to be? You know, I don't like any of it. And I'm just saying, it's almost like spot zoning, you know, okay, you can have one, you can't have one, you can't have one. You know, I think that's just, I don't have anything to go by. I don't know about Enchanted Cafe. I don't know anything.
That's the thing with the school board. They didn't know either. There was no plans. Nobody from Enchanted has reached out to anybody. That's the thing. Nobody knows what they want to do.
Yeah,
So
well, I'm
there's no
sure if they could have taken your license away, the school would have voted no too.
We did transfer.
Yeah, but
We
it was a
transferred
transfer, it wasn't a new
Yeah, but when we
license.
did transfer, the school board did object, and the police department did object. So we went in front of liquor control, and liquor control, like I said, they make the decision. We don't, as council, make the decision, liquor
Okay.
control. So we went in front of liquor control, the school did object, and then we went to liquor control in Columbus, and they went in favor for us because we had no violations or no problems. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but in order for me to get, I don't know how this is going to be. I can't go by what somebody else did and how bad they ran their establishment versus this one, you know. I don't, the people there are very nice and very friendly at the cafe. I don't know about this. But then, you know, Sheets is putting one in too. I know that's down on Barber Road, which is Norton, but I can't base on how they're going to run their operation versus how the other one operates. That's all I'm saying.
And again, the only reason I'm objecting, because constituents did. I was going to abstain from voting tonight, but Mr. Greer told me as president that I have to vote because I objected. Does that make sense? And again, I'm not objecting, I'm against this because constituents said they were against this. Not me, not you, the constituents who live in the area, up to, all the way up to Worcester Road, up to almost Creedmoor. That's how far I walked.
So I wonder if I did a survey in your ward, how many of them would object to yours?
Correct.
It could be 100.
Exactly. And that's why I looked.
You know, it could be, you know, so that's a moot point. I understand, because you're elected by your constituents and you want to listen to your constituents. But I just feel that a brand new one's going in and you have yours, and this one is, I guess we'll just let the liquor license board, I mean, of course, the police have no objection because Enchanted Square isn't even a thing yet. Is it a thing?
No.
Okay, so it's not even a thing, so they wouldn't have anything to go back except for the other place.
Right.
Okay.
I just have a question for Lori. When you ask for the objections, I know that you send it to the ward council person and the safety and yada yada. However, do you usually send it to the school board?
The liquor control board does that. I only
Okay.
send it to what
All right, because I was wondering how they were even voting on it.
the liquor control sends out the same thing they send to me, a
Mhm.
copy of the application for the license, and you have so many days to get it back, and you have to check whether you request a hearing or not.
Mhm.
You don't say no, excuse me, yes or no. do I request a hearing? And like I said, you have a time limit to get this back. The school board gets it, and I don't know what other bodies around get it. When I get it, our policy is that I make a copy, I scan a copy, I email it to Vince Morber, Chief of Police, Jamie Eisman, Safety Director, and the ward council person that represents that area. This has been applied for, see the attached if you have any objections, and I usually put a 2-week out date.
This is
Please
for
return
you.
it, you know, whether you have an objection or not to me. I don't even ask what your objection is. All I say, do you or don't you? And then when if I get an objection from, and it's been so rare, I think I've had maybe 2 that have had objections in the 3 or 4 years I've been doing this. And I'll check at the hearing, and I keep all the emails copied and everything I get, and it's all stapled to that license. If I get, police have no objections, safety has no objections, the ward council person will say, I talk to people, I have no objections. I just send it back that we have no objections. I don't send it back, we approve this.
Yeah.
That's the only question they ask me. Do we request a hearing or not?
I have one more question on that. Everyone's talking about sheets. Now, that's probably in Norton, because I was wondering if they would have that many liquor licenses, in that small of an area, but that will be a different community.
That
They
go
will
to
be the ones
Cary
that have
and
to.
Norton. Right. That'll
Okay.
go to Norton City Council if it, I'm not even sure where they're building it, but if it's in the municipality of Norton, then it'll go to Cary and Norton to check with her council.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more question. And maybe Mr. Heidi, it says new C1, C2. So do they only let a certain amount in the city of C1, C2 licenses? And if so, how did they get a new one? Did they buy it from somebody else? From Circle K, did they buy their license? How do you get a new license?
Yeah.
When it's a new license, if memory serves, a C-class license is 1 per 1,000 residents of your city. D-class license, which is bars, is 1 per every 2,000. There are some exemptions for bars and restaurants. A D3A has no quota, so those are just as many as can be. But there is a population limit to how many can be. Now, not every, and I would have to look it up on the Department of Commerce's website. There is a list of how many of every single class is available in every city, how many permits are on file that have applied, and then how many would be still available. So theoretically, there could be more C-class licenses available. There could be a couple D-class licenses still available. As a matter of fact, the one we read maybe a month ago with the VFW's D5 that there was no objection to. D5 is what's considered the Cadillac of bars and restaurant liquor license. That actually was available, and I know there's some stigma that, there's so many bars in Barberton. There are still some licenses available. Last time I looked, anyone here could get a liquor license to serve beer and hard liquor at an establishment, but not wine, because that particular license is hit the limit. So yes, there is population quota for all of these. Now, had they bought one, it wouldn't say new, it would say transferred.
Transfer, that's what.
Right, so if a Circle K decided they were leaving and wanted to sell to somebody else, it would come up as a transfer because that license exists. This one theoretically does not exist, it's just open for anybody to grab, it's up for grabs. So just to put my take in here, when a liquor hearing happens, what happens is there's a representative, a hearing officer, that hears the case, finds his fact, and sends it to the superintendent, who issues the final ruling. Now, just because there's an objection, the argument on one side versus the person getting it, the officer hears both sides and then makes his recommendation. There's some in the state that there's been heavy objections that the superintendent decides have no merit and issue it anyway. There's some that the objections are so valid, the hearing officer recommends it not happening. So just because a legislative body objects to it, the hearing officer would find the facts and say, you know what, we understand your objections, but we don't think they hold water, we're going to issue it anyway. Or they say, everything you've said is valid, and recommend denial from the superintendent. But that's who makes the final decision. And then lastly, to Councilor Angeloff's points of there are, it's a new operator, things that happened in the past. There's a convenience store on Snyder Avenue that was objected to by the city, not the legislative body, and I testified on behalf of them in support of it. The same thing you've just been saying, or this kind of the same points I was saying, but once again, as a legislative body, one member can't speak for all of us. So if we vote to object, then we're welcome to the hearing. If we vote we don't object to it, and there's still a hearing, we can just as easily go in and testify that we had no objections, as a council member, as our vote, so that the hearing officer could take all the things into consideration of the legislative body. Now, if it was a unanimous vote one way or another, I don't think anybody would need to testify, but if it was a splintered vote and somebody felt strongly enough one way or the other, they would be welcome to testify.
We're kind of caught in the middle here.
Who's in charge?
Mr. Chambers, the state in this case.
I wanted to know, you're talking about that it's going to go before the liquor board, so does it really even matter if we take a vote? Because it's already going to go before the board.
We're not voting.
It would be, if we voted to object, that would go to the hearing officers that the legislative body objected. If we voted not to, then
There won't be a hearing?
there wouldn't be an objection from the legislative body.
Right,
Now,
so, I'm sorry.
when the law department
Do that with the new one.
or the police object, that's one branch. If the executive office, the mayor, object, that's that office. Those are single entities. We are not a single entity, so that's why we would vote to say, yes, we as the legislative body object, or
No, we don't.
if no objection is the majority, then nothing comes from the legislative body.
Okay.
Mrs. Bailey?
To be clear, Mr. President, are we voting to object the liquor license, or are we objecting his objection to the liquor license?
I know, I let this go a little longer
Yes,
than
please.
what I would have liked it to go, just because this is the first time and
Well, it's
everybody's
a new
kind of...
license. I
Everybody's
don't know.
asking questions, and it makes sense to kind of let this play out. So what's going to happen if once everybody's comfortable and that his case has been made, or the objector's case has been stated everything that they wanted to say, we're going to take just a simple vote. Who sides with the objection, right? We're going to take a vote as a legislative body. Does the legislative body want to move forward with that objection? If it's yes, then we will forward that information to the state, and at which time our law director, Mrs. Miller, will then represent the legislative body on our behalf with the information presented by the person or people that have objected to that license. So at the end of the day, it's supposed to be a really simple process, but we've kind of opened up the door to kind of just bounce around things. So this is the first time we're kind of doing this. So that's, we'll be taking a vote for the objection
Okay,
as a body.
okay.
So
Mr.
this
Jerry?
final thing, again, this was constituents and the school board who were asking me to object. Again, constituents and the school board. And as I told you, I've known Suzanne for 20 years now. And it's sad to say I haven't spoke to her, like I said, in 4 months, so because of this whole situation. I was hoping to be done with it and pass it to Emily Beck.
Emily, let her worry about it, huh?
Yeah, I was trying to get it to Emily before I got out of here. So, but again, as constituents, they asked me to object. That's why we're here.
I just want to say something publicly.
Yes.
This is a new license. I don't even know who these people are. I don't even know how they're going to operate that. I don't like any of them in front of the school. But I don't think it's fair to, to say,
And that's why I reached out to her. I'm like, come down, talk to us. That way people can
so we
meet
can
her.
see something,
But
what the
nobody's came,
plan is.
Nobody's showing any plans, and that's the thing. We asked for plans, and nobody got the plans. And that's why the school board said no. And that's in their paperwork. Again,
With that said, Mr. Jaber, are you comfortable with,
yes.
all right? Is there any other remarks? What we'll do now is we'll just take a simple vote for the legislative body objecting to the liquor license. So all those in favor, I would say signify by saying aye, but please raise your hand so I can count.
Let me ask another question. If we vote yes, that means we agree with him?
Yes.
And if we vote no, that means that we don't go along with the
Right.
objection?
Correct.
Correct? All right, we have to be,
Yeah, so yes, we'll send it to the objection to Columbus.
Say it again.
All right. You good?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. So we're going to take a simple vote. A yes vote is for objecting to the liquor license. Please raise your hand. Keep your hand up, please. All right, 3, 4, and against? Well, it's a tie, it's a standoff.
No.
And
There's no tie when there's a tiebreaker.
There is, well, I'm saying, and I will object to a yes vote to send it to the review board. So, with that said, that liquor license does have an objection from the legislative body, and we'll move forward with the normal process that the liquor license goes through. All right. Are there any other miscellaneous and unfinished business? We do have a couple things. Do we have a motion to excuse Mrs. Thompson tonight? Mr. Hayden?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to excuse Counselor Thompson from tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mr. Jaber to excuse Councilwoman Thompson from tonight's meeting, Monday, November 27th. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mrs. Thompson is excused. Next up, do I have a motion to excuse Councilwoman Colburn from tonight's meeting? Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to excuse Counselor Coburn from tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second that. I will second that.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mr. Jaber to excuse Councilwoman Colburn from tonight's meeting, Monday, November 27th. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
aye.
Opposed? Mrs. Colburn is excused. Is there anything from the body? Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. First off, I'm glad that we actually were able to talk about what happens to the legislative body with a issuance of a liquor license. Second, in regards to that, to those who did not object, I urge you to reach out to the law department. So Director Miller will have the meeting information, and you can testify on behalf of them and give your opinions, the same you've stated here, so that the hearing officer does hear those and takes those into consideration. They don't drag you down to Reynoldsburg anymore. It's actually on Microsoft Teams, so you can do it from home at, I think it's usually 9 or 10 in the morning. But if you feel strongly, please, I urge you to reach out to the law director so that you can, if you can't be in there, you can at least email or write something on behalf. That's how those hearings work. That way, your opinions matter too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other communication from the body? Well, the only thing I have is hope everybody's Thanksgiving was great. Now we're just looking forward to Christmas music's coming on, and Christmas is up next. With that said, there is a winter weather advisory Who knows if it'll be half an inch or 3 feet where we're at. So just keep that in mind. Stay safe. Next, and that's all I have. So communication from the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to thank everyone who participated in or volunteered with the Christmas walk this past weekend. No snow this past weekend. It was a great turnout, a lot of different things going on throughout the downtown. So really showcasing the downtown and Lake Anna Park. So thank you. December, we'll kick off our annual collection of non-perishables and toiletries benefiting the Barberton Salvation Army in Backham. We've done this for a number of years now. So it's going to run from December 1st through the end of January in '24. Right now, my office and the Lake Anna YMCA are drop-off points, but I'm in contact with multiple businesses throughout town to serve as drop-off points. They don't want to be a drop-off point, just collecting a few cans from their, or toiletries from their employees. You know, every little bit helps. So I can give more information as this unfolds. As mentioned by the president, this is time for crazy weather. The Cleveland area this morning and the snow belt expected anywhere from 3 to 14 inches, and then that was raised to closer to 18 inches in the snow belt over the next 24 to 36 hours. This morning, it wasn't supposed to come down this far, but as you can tell watching the news that it is on its way. So, with property taxes going up and other costs going up, we continue to push out the Barberton Residential Services Relief Program. This is our version of the homestead exemption. If you remember earlier this year, Council, at my request, changed the criteria to match what the Summit County Fiscal Office is. So if you meet the criteria in one, you meet it for the other one. So we're working with the Fiscal Office. So when we get applications and process them, we can send it on to the Fiscal Office, and that's where you get the break on property taxes. So if you know of any constituents or anyone that may meet the qualifications, please have them contact the Utilities Office or my office, or you contact me and we can get them an application and send that out to them. Save a little bit of coin here and there. So, just lastly, my last open office hours will be Saturday, December 9th at the Active Adult Center from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. No appointment needed. That's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Did you say last?
What's that?
Did you say last open office?
Yeah, the last one for this year.
Oh, for the year. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's great. We have a good turnout, a lot of good questions, correcting a lot of misleading information that's out there, so it's always a good time. So. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. With nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Heide?
Thank you, Mr. President. I motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Mrs. Frye?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second Mr. Heidick's motion to adjourn.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Frye that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, this meeting is adjourned at 7:01 p.m.